In the year 1830, just a few miles from the place that would become the great city of Cincinnati, Ohio, there lay an immense and nearly endless forest. This vast wilderness was dotted with a few settlements carved out by rugged pioneers. Many of these early settlers had already pushed further west, seeking new horizons, but among those who stayed was a man who had been one of the very first to arrive. He lived a solitary life in a log house, completely encircled by the great, silent forest. He seemed to have become a part of the darkness and the quiet of his surroundings, for no one had ever seen him smile or heard him utter a word that was not absolutely necessary. His simple needs were met by selling or trading the pelts of wild animals in the nearby town. His small log cabin had a single door, and directly across from it, a single window. But this window was boarded up with heavy planks. No one could remember a time when it was not sealed shut, and no one knew the reason why. I imagine there are very few people alive today who ever knew the secret of that window, but I am one of them, as you are about to see. The man's name was said to be Josiah. He had the appearance of a man of 70, though he was truly only 50. Something other than the passage of time had caused his premature aging. His hair and his long, full beard were a stark white. His lifeless gray eyes were sunken deep into his skull, and his face was a map of wrinkles. He was tall and gaunt, with shoulders that drooped as if under the weight of a terrible burden. I never saw him myself. These details were passed down to me by my grandfather, who had told me the man's story when I was just a boy. He had known Josiah when he lived nearby in those early days. One day, Josiah was discovered dead in his cabin. In that time and place, there were no medical examiners or bustling newspapers. I suppose it was simply agreed upon that he had died of natural causes, or else I would have been told and I would remember. All I know for certain is that his body was buried near the cabin, right next to the resting place of his wife. She had passed away so many years before him that local memory held very little of her existence. This closes the final chapter of this true story, except for an incident that occurred many years later. Filled with a boy's fearless spirit, I ventured to the site and got close enough to the ruined cabin to hurl a stone against its decaying walls. I then turned and fled, desperate to avoid the ghost that every well-informed boy in the region knew haunted that desolate spot. But there is an earlier part of this story, the part supplied by my grandfather. When Josiah first built his cabin, he was a young man, strong and filled with hope for the future. He embarked on the grueling work of clearing the land to create a farm. He kept a rifle for hunting, which provided for his sustenance. He had married a young woman who was, in every way, worthy of his honest love and unwavering loyalty. She shared in the dangers and toils of frontier life with a willing spirit and a light heart. There is no surviving record of her name, nor any specific details about her. They simply loved each other and were happy. One day, Josiah returned from a hunt deep within the forest to find his wife gravely ill, stricken with a high fever and a state of confusion. There was no doctor or neighbor for miles. She was in no condition to be left alone while he sought help. So, Josiah did his best to care for his wife, hoping to nurse her back to health. But at the end of the third day, she slipped into unconsciousness and died. From what we know of a man like Josiah, we can try to imagine some of the details of the story my grandfather told. When he was certain she was gone, Josiah had enough sense to remember that the dead must be prepared for their final rest. He made mistakes now and then while performing this solemn duty. He did certain things incorrectly, and other tasks which he did right, he found himself doing over and over again. He was surprised that he could not cry, surprised and a little ashamed. Surely it is unkind not to shed tears for the dead. Tomorrow, he said aloud to the empty room, I will have to build the coffin and dig the grave. And then, I will miss her when she is no longer in my sight. But for now she is dead, of course, but it is all right. It must be all right, somehow. Things cannot be as terrible as they seem. He stood over the body of his wife in the fading light. He carefully arranged her hair and made finishing touches to her simple burial clothes. He did all of this mechanically, without conscious thought, but with great care. And still, through his numb mind ran the persistent feeling that all was right, that he would have her again as she was before, and that everything would be explained. Josiah had no experience with profound grief. His heart could not contain the sheer magnitude of it, his imagination could not grasp its reality. He did not yet know how deeply he had been struck. That knowledge would come later, and it would never leave him. Deep sorrow is a powerful artist, affecting people in different ways. To one, it comes like the swift strike of an arrow, shocking all the emotions into a sharper, more painful life. To another, it comes as a crushing, numbing blow. We may believe Josiah was affected in this second way. Soon after he had finished his summer work, he sank into a chair by the side of the table upon which the body lay. He noticed how pale his wife's face looked in the deepening twilight. He laid his arms on the table's edge and rested his face in them, tearless and overcome by an immense weariness. At that moment, a long, screaming sound came in through the open window. It was like the cry of a lost child, echoing from the far, deep shadows of the darkening forest. But the man did not move. He heard that unearthly cry again, closer this time, as it registered upon his failing senses. Perhaps it was a wild animal, perhaps it was only a dream, for Josiah had fallen asleep. Some hours later, he awoke. He lifted his head from his arms and listened intently, though he knew not why. There, in the black darkness by the side of the body, he remembered everything without a shock. He strained his eyes, trying to see into the oppressive gloom. All his senses were on high alert. He held his breath, and his blood seemed to stand still, as if to aid the profound silence. Who, or what, had awakened him? And where was it? Suddenly, the table shook beneath his arms. At the same time, he heard, or perhaps imagined he heard, a light, soft step and then another. The sounds were like bare feet walking upon the floor. He was afraid, beyond the power to cry out or even to move. He waited, and waited, there in the darkness, through what seemed like centuries of such terror, a fear that one may know and yet live to tell of. He tried, but failed, to speak his dead wife's name. He tried, but failed, to stretch his hand across the table to learn if she was still there. His throat was paralyzed, his arms and hands felt as heavy as lead. Then, something utterly frightful happened. It felt as if a heavy body was thrown against the table with a force that slammed into his chest. At the same time, he heard and felt the fall of something upon the floor, a crash so violent that the whole house shook. A struggle followed, a confusion of sounds impossible to describe. Josiah had scrambled to his feet. Extreme fear had caused him to lose control of his senses. He threw his hands upon the table. Nothing was there. There is a point at which fear can turn to insanity, and insanity incites action. With no definite plan, acting like a madman, Josiah ran to the wall. He seized his loaded rifle and, without taking aim, fired it. The flash from the rifle lit the room with a momentary, clear brightness. In that instant he saw a huge, fierce panther dragging the dead woman toward the window. The wild animal's teeth were locked in her throat. Then there was darkness, blacker than before, and silence. When he returned to consciousness, the sun was high in the sky, and the forest was filled with the cheerful sounds of singing birds. The body lay near the window, where the animal had abandoned it when frightened away by the light and sound of the rifle. The clothing was ruined, the long hair was in wild disarray, the arms and legs lay in a careless posture. A pool of blood had formed, flowing from the horribly torn throat. The ribbon he had used to tie her wrists together was broken. Her hands were clenched tightly into fists, and between her teeth was a small piece of the animal's ear.